Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on Times flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. In January 2019, I opened a show with tonight's guest by pointing to the recent rapid changes in social consciousness, which mainstream science had not been able to explain, but which scientist and philosopher Dr. Carl Kellerman had correlated with the activation of new waves of creation emanating from the center of the universe that influence human thinking. Over the past 10 years, international teacher, speaker, author, and founder of Mastering Alchemy, Jim Self, and I have recorded numerous shows in which we have discussed and tracked the effects of these waves of creation, or light, that guide the evolution of the universe, and through their holographic resonance with our human minds, create revolutions in religion, technology, economy, and social consciousness. Tonight, as the most capricious, divisive, hazardous, and inarguably aberrant year that many of us have ever known stumbles to an indecisive end, Jim Self joins me once more to share his observations, explanations, and guidance for how we can navigate what is coming ahead for us on planet Earth. Jim, welcome back.
Hi, Sandie. Always very delightful to be here with you.
So here we are 10 years later, after, first discussing all of this, and everybody thought, it's going to be 2012, and of course it wasn't. And you write in the book, what do you mean the third dimension is falling away? And here we are with it all falling away and collapsing around us. Where do you want to start this conversation? Because we've had aspects of it so many times, and yet nobody expected it to look the way it's looking today.
Well, yeah, that's true and not so true in a way, because in a lot of ways we've been saying this is what it basically is going to look like, or is what is going to begin to happen. And one of the pieces you and I have talked about numbers of times is kind of the segmentation. I don't want to say separation, but the segmentation of how we are observing and engaging in the world around us. And you're watching these kind of mass consciousness beginning to split up in ideological terms, or in fear, very much in fear about, I have mine and it's starting to be threatened. And so you're watching all of these divisions. And there really are two divisions. One of them is fear-based, dig in your heels, argue for your limitations, and I've got mine and keep them out. And the other one is this evolution into a level of consciousness where there is co-creation and cooperation and ease and laughter. And yet in each one of us, we still hold fear and the uncertainty. And it's a very difficult thing to how humans think. We say, well, I really want to go on this vacation, but tell me all the pieces. Am I going to have this? Am I going to have this? And is it going to be a nice day? And is the hotel going to be okay? And is the food going to be okay? Once you tell me it's going to be okay, then I'll step into it. But the space that we are beginning to experience is a space where you get into present time, take a breath, and jump off the cliff, because it's going to be a wonderful experience. And you know it is going to be a wonderful experience. You don't wait for somebody to validate what's possible. You're seeing people begin to just step into beliefs that it's going to be a better way. But those two segmentations are unfolding. And right now, the one of digging in your heels in fear is the loud one.
The very loud one. You know, I mean, listeners to this show know that I keep an eye on the astrology, and it's so interesting what has been pointed out to us. And you've said it many, many times. You've given people guidance, instructions, attention, intention, pay attention. And isn't it strange how we don't hear it? You know, we go, oh, yeah, of course, right, okay. But we don't really hear it until something big like this happens and we go, oh, that's what you meant, pay attention.
Yeah, and a lot of times that is, oh, that's what you meant, is now after the fact.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, you told me, but I didn't believe you, or I didn't understand, or I didn't listen, or whatever it may be. And the topic you and I've talked about often is this concept of time. And one of the key components to how everything is really anchored into the mass conscious belief structure is we believe that time is what's on our watch: past, present, future, then you die, and that's all there is to it. And as long as you continue to hold your attention in that linearness of time, we have a very fundamental construct. I look at my past, and I'm either going to do what they told me in my past in my future to be successful, or I hope what happened in my past doesn't jump up and bite me in my future. And so we spend virtually very, very little time in present time, and we are determining our well-being and our fear tolerance by paying attention to the past and hoping things do or don't happen in the future. In that space, we wind up getting very caught up in the nature of mass consciousness. Well, this is how it is. And we don't really get into that individuality where we can have an opinion on our own and own it, and then simply step into how we would like it to be. And that's the segmentation that we're beginning to be confronted with. Do you kind of jump into the herd mentality because it's theoretically safe, or do you simply begin to recognize that herd mentality is really not a very comfortable place to be, and it's mostly not getting me what I would like to begin to experience?
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, you've talked about the fifth dimension. We've heard so much talk about almost like two worlds. We're moving in directions where those who can't move forward will stay where they are, and those who do move forward will, in effect, be living in a different place for all intents and purposes. We're seeing so much cognitive dissonance. We're experiencing, this bifurcation, this split, the division that is happening is becoming, so apparent to us. And, I've never known a time when I've watched so many people who think that they've been on a spiritual path for a long, long time and think they've got their handle on what's going on and, done their work. And now it's almost as if they're beginning to fragment under the dissonance of what's going on right now. They can't quite hold it together.
Yeah. And, in the context of mastering alchemy, which is all about teaching tools in terms of how to manage yourself on an energetic level, a very large component of who we are individually is how we think and how we feel or how we hold emotion. And in that context, you create these huge electromagnetic fields that take fear, for example, and you begin to be terrified, and you have a thought, and you begin to draw that emotion of fear into it, and it's paralyzing. Or you have a thought of well-being, and all of a sudden you start to have an ability to laugh or find ease in that space. And one of the challenges with what happens is you can't take your baggage on this journey, as we've said an infinite number of times. And so a lot of spiritual folks who have decided they can believe in a focused attention point of well-being, whatever that is, to a great extent, a lot of that is simply based on what they have said in the past. This is what spiritualism is. And so even many spiritual people begin to simply buy into how it has been, whatever religion, whatever spiritual practice that has been taught for centuries must be the truth. But what happens is everything is changing. And so many of those concepts and constructs in various belief systems, spiritual belief systems, are very valid. But when they are held in a past teaching as the truth, it begins to be very difficult and rigid to simply step into a new foundation or a new construct. So I have this belief, and this is how it is, but have you noticed it doesn't open the door that you're thinking it's supposed to open? And that's one of the challenges I'm watching with so many spiritual people, is they don't recognize I have the ability to alter my thought and alter the emotion or the feeling that I attach to that thought in present time, to then just simply experience. Everything comes to me, and how would I like to experience my creation? So it's a fascinating point of contradiction in a lot of ways based on how I think it's supposed to be and what's staring you in the face.
Yeah, contradiction is a very apt word. You know, thinking about Carl Kalleman's work and the waves of creation that he's written so much about in, you know, the trilogy of books, which is, you know, quite, I think, fascinating.
Yes.
And it's the same waves that you've been talking about, the waves of light, I mean, that are literally affecting our minds and everything that we're creating. I mean, because we're creating it all, aren't we? I mean, we're creating the religion, we're creating the technology, the economy, the consciousness, every single part of it. And yet it's how we're choosing to create that I just find so fascinating to observe. Because some people are choosing to create quite consciously something, you know, that is, let's say, for good, you know, good or bad. I mean, you know, who knows what that means. But let's say it's something, you know, really positive, and others are wanting to create something that just tears everything apart.
Yeah, and you just watched that all through this last 4 years of a presidency in the United States, for example, and the division between kind of the red and the blue, the liberal and the conservative. But if you take all those labels off of it, what you're really watching is two very distinct patterns of one that has some ability to look at things in motion, and one that only wants to create a stopping point of the motion because it's what's familiar, without making anybody bad or good. We've talked about this, that amygdala in the brain is structured when it literally, all the studies that look at it, you have somebody who has a progressive personality. There is aspects of that amygdala that do not exist in that same personality that's fear-based and wants to hold everything where it is so that they're not interrupted. And that's in the process of being very much altered as this level of consciousness begins to shift.
Along with, you know, when we look at the disintegration, I mean, you said about people believing, you know, this is the spiritual path, and this is what is supposed to be true, and this is what it's supposed to happen. And then, of course, they find out that actually that's not true anymore, because we are watching so much fragment and dissolve and disappear. And what's left behind is something that none of us have any acquaintance with, or not a real acquaintance with.
Yeah.
So how do we, you know, how do we move through a time where everything we know is dissolving? And I mean really dissolving. We've talked about things, you know, crashing before, but I mean really dissolving in front of our eyes, so that one can't even think the same thoughts anymore.
No, and some of it is really shakes people. When you basically take a look at, just go back a year or 2 years ago, and if you said to somebody in the United States, your democracy is threatened. And depending on what happens within the next period of time, you may actually lose your democracy. That is an inconceivable concept to an American citizen. Inconceivable, because it just is. It's like saying, well, your religion is going to go away in 6 months. Inconceivable concept. And what's happening, though, is these waves of light, this shifting, this unfolding, is very disruptive, these waves, these shifts that are in process. And I use the word disruptive versus destructive. Disruptive is, it's simply beginning to loosen up the rigidity and begin to bring things into the surface that are no longer valid constructs of consciousness or thought. And as it brings it into the present time moment, for a lot of people, that's terrifying. And for other people, it's simply very liberating and very freeing. And so you get some of these that are quite apparent, except if you're not able to think in those terms, it's threatening. So you get Black Lives Matters that is popping up, and you take away the fringe edge where there's violence attached to it, and you take the other 90%, and then the impact it's beginning to have on people, where people say, well, I'm not a white person, I'm not racist, and they actually are correct and they believe it, until you start to look at the construct that is never spoken, that basically allows redlining to happen in housing and banking constraints that don't let loans get made, and educational limitations. And all of a sudden you realize what a racist society we live in. But until recently, that would be all, well, it's not a problem. That's going to be improved upon in the future attitude. But now people are starting to have it very much right in front of them and recognizing, yeah, this isn't appropriate. And so you're seeing these shifts in consciousness where we've been unconscious of being unconscious, to now starting to become conscious of the unconsciousness we've been living in, which is really positive from my point of view, leading us to a place of becoming conscious of being conscious. And that's what these waves are doing. They're basically bringing things to the surface and allowing a person or forcing a person to look at them.
There's two things going on. I mean, there's what's going on here in front of us on the ground, in our societies, in our cultures, in the way we live our lives. And there's also what is going on to our, with regard to our consciousness and, the bigger picture of all of this. And I think that's the, the division between those two is getting wider. So it's really hard to move from looking at this from a 3D or even, and a 5D perspective.
Yeah. Well, let's just define 5D in its simplest terms. We'll call it well-being, a state of well-being, appreciation, gratitude, kindness, respect, dignity, co-creation, integrity, well-being, without trying to define 5D as some, new life that everybody's going to experience, just simply well-being. And what you're watching, though, is this shift in this level of consciousness where something is being made available, but it's inconceivable in so many ways. And the distinction is, as we grow up in 3D, our tendency is to kind of do what we're told to fit in. That's very much the role of the rational mind as we think. It's to keep us safe and have us fit in. And fit in means that one over there needs to like me, and I hope I don't upset that one over there. And I need to go to those to be told what to do so I fit in. And so the nature of how we've all kind of grown up is making sure I'm okay with them over there, and they like me, and I'm doing the right thing so I'm not going to get in trouble. And the focus is going to the world for your validation and your approval and your simple well-being. But if the world doesn't agree with you, if mom, dad, teacher, minister don't agree with you for some way, all of a sudden you're told you're not okay. And so we grow up in that construct, mass consciousness, that the world will tell you how you fit in. So the shift that is unfolding right now that's so fascinating is when you begin to be in a present time space, you begin to decide, I'm okay, and you simply step into your present time and observe the world from like, what's really going on? One of the things you begin to find out is everything comes to you. You don't need to go to them out there, whoever the them are, to be told you're okay. And that's the biggest part of this shift, but it's very disconcerting because I've never asked myself, what do I want? How do I navigate so I find my own well-being? I mean, many do, but the majority don't. And there, I think, is where this shift is beginning to push on people because they don't know what to do when it comes to what do you want to do?
I think one of the hardest things for anybody who is on a spiritual path, who has done a lot of work to get to grips with right now, is the fact that we actually created all of this. This is the law of attraction in action. It's there in front of us because we pulled it in.
We have. We have. And it's not something to be upset about. It's kind of part of the game. And this game started a long time ago, and I'm going to call it a game, because that's what it is, rather than calling it a good or a bad. But this game has been evolving for a long time, and there are constructs in the game that are pretty much absolutes. And one of those is the law of attraction. And, everybody says, oh, I know all about the law of attraction. But, what kind of my take on the law of attraction is a space where what you put your attention on is what you bring to yourself. And this is where I watch a lot of people in Mastering Alchemy from a spiritual practice. They basically will, let's say, do an affirmation. I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. And they'll do it 10,000 times, and they'll be really aligned with it. But the very last statement is virtually always but. I'm really good, but. And so the universe, which adores you, basically says, I will provide to you exactly what you hold your attention on. But where it gets to be a challenge is the universe doesn't understand English, French, and Spanish. What the universe understands is the vibration that you hold. And so when you grow up in that 3D we just spoke about, and I'm really hostage to the world around us, mom, dad, teacher, minister, if they don't like me or don't approve of me or constantly tell me what's wrong with you, well, what happens is that it throws us off at a significant level. And the worst question to try to answer, because there is no answer, is when you get told you're not okay. And all of a sudden it's as if somebody hands you this gift that says you're not okay. And here you are holding on to this gift, bad, uncomfortable gift, and then you ask the question, what's wrong with me? It's an unanswerable question, because it's simply somebody else's bad lifetime in that moment throwing up all over you. And then because it doesn't feel good, what we tend to do is we kind of say, well, I'm going to put it over in this little box called denial. Well, over time, denial keeps jumping up at you and you keep noticing it. So then you decide, well, I'm going to put it in my backpack where nobody can see it, and I'll make a deal with it. I'm never going to go over there and talk to those people again if you don't jump out and bite me in the butt. And so all of a sudden we begin to create these contractions and these limitations and these avoidances and these withdrawals, and pretty soon we become a hider in many ways from the world around us, so they don't see that I'm not okay. But the universe simply says, law of attraction, what you hold your attention on, and there's that subconsciousness, where we all walk around with this, what did I do wrong? And the reality is you've never done anything wrong. Yeah, you've done things that haven't gotten you an outcome, But down really at the bottom of that, the law of attraction just says, wow, Jim must love this because here he is doing it again today. So I'll just give him more of the same. And it'll come in different packages and colors and sizes and shapes. But basically, there's your law of attraction. And then when everybody then tries to fit in and become conforming in that mass consciousness versus, let's distinguish between group consciousness, where we can all talk about a concept and we can all have an individuality about what we think about this concept. But in mass consciousness, it's like herd mentality. You just go along. So this law of attraction is something that in that mass consciousness, which is now being disrupted, is this mindset that the law of attraction has provided us. And the universe says, change your attention point and I'll create a new reality for you. And that's what's now happening. All the spiritual folks who basically have been saying for a long time, I don't like the way the world treats one another as one human to another. And that attention point has really brought about a lot of change over the last 50, 60 years, very predominantly accelerating over the last 10.
You know, one of the things that fascinates me is the correlation that I see between, you know, astrology and what that's pointing to and what is actually happening in our external reality. And I think trying to find a meaning or something that you can hold on to, that you can grasp and understand to make sense of things is something that would give a lot of people a really, you know, good grounding right now. That seems to be what's missing, because the more the frenzy of fear is whipped up, the harder it is for people to really have a sense of themselves, have a sense of what they really think, what they believe, what they need. You know, the sense of self seems to be, and certainly Eric Francis, you know, who's one of my favourite astrologers, points to this a lot, saying how much we've lost our sense of self because we spend so much of our time in a digital world, where it's an out-of-body experience, so to speak.
Yes, it very much is. And it basically, you flow with it. You don't really, you play more or less by the rules of it, and you flow with that digital world. And there's not a lot of individuality in there. And the digital world is now because of the capacity of the massive amount of data that people have fed into the digital world and the really significance of how AI works, basically you're just being narrowed into those limitations of the thoughts that you hold about what you think the world is. And it just, a feedback loop basically says, well, this is what you like, let me give you more of the same. And so there's your law of attraction once again playing out on a more then it's a little different platform. But basically, if you really think about it, people are getting exactly what they want. They dive into social media. They dive into Facebook, Twitter. They dive into simply particular social media radio stations that align with their belief system. And all of a sudden, you're very narrowly put into a very tiny box that has nothing to do with the rest of the world at all. And that's going to be challenging.
Mass hypnotism, isn't it?
It is. It's exactly that. And so again, here you are. But see, there's your word again, mass. You're in that mass consciousness, not an individual consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, we say, how can people do some of the things, that we've all gulped at in the news? How could somebody possibly do something like that? I've read stories of people after the war saying, I don't know what came over me. I don't know why I did some of those awful things. There's something going on with the consciousness that is, as you said, it's kind of it's steering us like sheep down a particular narrow tunnel. And there we are, all herded having the same thoughts and the same beliefs and the same feelings.
Yeah, but wait, let's go one step below that, because that's correct. But one step below it, now we're talking kind of in the astrology range, in the digital world range, in the new kind of consciousness range. Is it really the social media, minus the people who are intentionally corrupting it and directing it and trying to take advantage? But take that out. Go to the layer below it, and basically a whole layer of consciousness is being presented to be utilized. When everybody is in a fear-based or wants instant gratification, which is kind of how we've structured our last 40 years, the system basically is just giving you more of what you're putting your attention on. But if you could step out of that mass consciousness and step into a group consciousness, let's just call it, where the individual expresses its point of view in and among others that are able to hear it and then discuss it without throwing energy and being outraged by it. All of a sudden, when you take a group consciousness and an intention to create something positive in a cooperative manner, fifth dimensional well-being, that platform of consciousness is very amenable to allowing new things to happen. So we're very much drawn into the way we're now being given this, let's call it new technology, and we're trying to apply how we have always done what we've done to the new technology, which is faster, quicker, more precise, more instantaneous in terms of delivering to you what you want. But when you try to do it from where you've been and all of the limitations and creative nature of how we've gotten into this place in the first place, law of attraction and that thought pattern, you really are going to be bumping around for some time until people realize, wait, I'm my own creator. And I have the capacity to have what I desire to have by just getting into present time, getting quiet, holding my attention onto it, and recognizing in this new technology, everything comes to you as you hold your attention upon it. And there's your law of attraction once again, playing out in a way that's taking seniority back from the mass consciousness to the individual and playing it out in a fifth dimensional space of respect and dignity and kindness and uplifting and nurturing others, as well as, I do a lot of talking lately. The whole game is 100% about you, 100% selfish about you, and 100% service to others. And that's a wonderful space because they both coincide in the exact same pace. Think about, you walk out of a grocery store and you walk through the door and you look behind you and here's a little old lady struggling with 3 bags in her hands, and instantly, what do? You open the door and say, let me help you. 100% for you. I like how I feel when I help somebody, and 100% for somebody else in service to them. When that it begins to be understood and you get quiet and you start to recognize this new technology, we'll call it this new strata of consciousness, is simply there to support your creation. Once that's grasped, it's amazing what begins to happen. But when you fight with it and try to figure out how to take the new technology and apply the old constructs to it, that's where you're starting to see people in confusion today.
Yeah. Jim, I said at the beginning, you and I have been having these conversations for 10 years. You've said the same thing again and again, issued the same guidance again and again in different ways. And here we are having to hear it again. Instead of getting better, it's as if it's just getting, got worse and worse and worse. Is it something, do you think, that because so few people are really listening, because so few people are in that place of sovereignty that you were talking about, the seniority, that, the external world has to show them, hold the mirror up to them and say, okay, well, you didn't like it then, but what about now? How bad does it have to get before you're going to listen and take back your power and change things? You know, I mean, it really is hard to figure out exactly what is going on and what we can do about it.
Well, let's go back. See, it's an evolution, and it's unfolding in a way where what has been has to be let go of. Again, you can't take your baggage with you. But so much of my baggage is my early wounds in life where I was told I wasn't okay, or I told a joke and everybody laughed at me instead of with me, and that shut me down. And so I don't know how to communicate with people, and I don't know that I have value. And my shop teacher told me I was never going to do something. In my own personal life, I remember my 6th grade teacher telling my mother, "No, Mrs. Self, look, the world needs truck drivers." She was like, "What? I don't want to be a truck driver." Those statements that people are told, they happen in a second, and they direct the rest of your life. And so that's the baggage that each of us as an individual are carrying around in the magnificence of who we are. But really, we don't know how to play the game. And yet what happens as soon as you begin to have some level of validation, and I watch it a lot of times in Mastering Alchemy, in people in the level 1 course, we just simply say, here are the tools to manage your energy. And try this out, and what happens? And it's amazing. Because people say, I've always known this, or I've always believed this, or this is really what my heart has always told me. So in an individual, that sense of identity is always there, but it gets covered up with you're not okay. This space that we're now engaged in is simply we are evolving into this kind of more consciousness that is related to who we are as an individual within that consciousness. And in that process, there is a lot of disruption going on. These new waves of light are very disruptive. They're disruptive from the standpoint of, again, not bad or good, but they're basically loosening up all of that I'm not okay, and it's beginning to rise up to the surface. The people have a challenge, because as I'm not okay rises up to the surface and becomes conscious, what we do is we say, oh, I thought I was done with my divorce of 25 years ago. Why are all these bad thoughts coming up? They're actually leaving, unless you grab a hold of them and go, why are you here? Which is one of the worst questions you can possibly ask. It's leaving. It's being disrupted. It's going away so you can begin to know who you are. But in the same context, there are enormous opportunities that are coming into the reality we're playing in. If you take technology, for example, and technology is really misunderstood because it's so far ahead of where the average person is even aware of the technology existing. So let me give you an amazing example, which is really fascinating to me, is this group has discovered how they use a different array of microwaves, and they apply it to the plastics that are floating in the ocean. And it simply reduces the plastic down to 2 components: pure hydrogen, which simply goes into the air immediately, or can be captured for later on fuel consumption, and carbon nanotubes that can now be applied to 3D printing that could build houses. So you all of a sudden, out of the waste plastic on the planet, begin to have this technology that provides new building materials that are not related on fossil fuel, because you got enough recycling to build out the next 25 years of construction, and hydrogen that basically can be captured and used for driving cars. That's just simply one of many, many pieces of technology that are coming in that are going to revolutionize the world in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. But the average person doesn't see that. They don't stop long enough to even ask what is going on. And so you see this disruption happening. The disruption is going to continue to happen. The real question is, how do each of us as an individual begin to simply recognize this mass consciousness doesn't really support me, but having the opportunity to become more of an individual thinker is very available if I simply step out of the way I have always done what I've always done.
Well, I mean, again, talking about mass consciousness, astrologically, we're moving away from Capricorn and we're moving into Aquarius, which is all about, community and relationships between groups and individuals. And it's going to be even more important for us to hold on to our sovereignty as we move forward. I mean, we're going to be in Aquarius for a long time, 20 years or more. Yeah.
But see, another part of this is when you start looking at things like astrology as real applications of information that gives you opportunity to choose differently. See, astrology, for the most part, is a horoscope that shows up in the newspaper for the average person. That's it. Yes. But what's happening is astrology is a whole level of understanding. I don't mean reading horoscopes. How the nature of the position of the Earth in relationship to the sun and the galaxy and the universe, how it all lines up is really no different than somebody deciding to just buy a house but never really did any research that in a year there's going to be a freeway and an oil refinery built on both sides of the house. And so we wind up saying, oh, I'll take that, but don't do any significant research or ask a better question. We don't say what else could go on here. I think what's happening with astrology is in this disruptive wave, astrology is beginning to make itself more of a player in the context of consciousness. And I think that's going to come to pass more and more in the next kind of 10, 15 years particularly.
I remember you and I having a conversation about that very point several years ago, where all the indications were that there was more to astrology than we had ever understood, and that was going to emerge as time went on. But I mean, and you talk about the waves of creation emanating from the center of the universe. Well, we're talking about the cosmos, we're talking about the planets and their relationship to one another. So we cannot discount astrology. In fact, it would bode us well to pay a lot more attention to it. Forewarned is forearmed.
But see, where this is going is that, so we could stop right here and somebody would walk away saying, oh, astrology is going to be more prominent. More specific, you as an individual, the audience and us, are becoming conscious. And in this next, let's call it layer of consciousness that we are becoming aware of, it really is like we've been living in a cloud, and all of a sudden the cloud goes away and you've got a massive panorama of awareness of what's out there that you never even knew existed with the cloud being in place. And so as this consciousness begins to be aware of you, you're going to start drawing from that eighth chakra a lot of information that has been there forever but hasn't been available. The cloud's been in the way. And so individually, we're going to start to know things that we didn't know before. And in Mastering Alchemy, I talk about it a lot, it's absolutely fascinating thing, is we'll say something and people go, oh, I didn't get that. And then you say it again, it's like, oh, I kind of got it. Oh, wait, say it again, I just lost it. And then you say it again finally, and they go, yeah, okay, I got it. The funny part is they don't realize that they ever did not have it. They don't remember that a minute ago they didn't know what we were just talking about. It's because the wiring wasn't connected. But in this new consciousness, a lot of the wiring, you're beginning to put yourself back together, rewire yourself, recreate yourself, remember yourself. It's in that remembering aspect of yourself that cloud goes away and you go, oh, of course, that panorama is, I know all about it, because you do. And so that's the evolution that's in process. You're just putting yourself back together, and as you put yourself back together piece by piece, you instantly remember that you've always known that piece. It's a fascinating thing watching the people in Mastering Alchemy all of a sudden begin to have this capacity to manage their energy field with grace in a way that has no effort attached to it. And they start to understand, if I just sit here quietly and hold my attention on my intention of well-being, well-being comes to me.
Yeah.
That's the evolution.
I'm glad you brought up that word intention, because, before we wrap up the show, I wanted you to just remind our listeners of how we can anchor our intentions firmly moving forward.
Well, see, I think to a great extent, playing in that 3D world we've all grown up in, and in the linearity of time, how often have you said, oh yeah, this is what I want to do, only to a second later forget that you just said, this is what I want to do? And so really anchoring intentions is something that this is where I want to go, but I have to go to them out there to get approval to go to where I want to go, is what most of us wind up dealing with. And then the mom, dad, teacher, minister of each of our lives say, no, that's not a good thing, or you don't want to do that, or this is how we do it, we don't do it that way. You've been talked out of your passions in this 3D world that we've grown up in. Not everybody, but plus or minus, all of us to some extent. And as we begin to get to the point where we start to begin to be that really important part, that's very selfish, 100% giving to me. Now, selfishness has two ends to the stick. One of them is the 3D end that says, I'm going to step on you, I'm going to take advantage of you, I'm going to use you so I can get ahead. And the only people like that are the ones that do that. The rest of us find that very uncomfortable. But the part about selfishness that people don't get to play in often in the 3D world is the one that says giving to myself, having for myself. And see, when you start to have for yourself, the ability to give to others becomes much more comfortable and of ease. And so this space of getting into a place where I can like me, I can get comfortable with, I can allow me to have, really is the kind of the magic of being of service to others. But so often you hear people say, well, I've got to take care of the world, I've got to fix everybody, I've got to be a healer, and then when they're all okay, I'll take care of me. Because that's that good Christian thing, do unto others before you do unto you. Or it's better to give than it's to receive. And to a great extent, that's a mass consciousness statement when you really think about it. If you keep giving and giving and giving, you have nothing left to give at the end of the day, or long before the end of the day. But if you can begin to have for yourself, enjoy for yourself, have an intention to simply, today I'm going to go and buy myself a cup of coffee, and I'm going to sit and enjoy it watching people. That littleness of having an intention, holding your attention on it, and then accomplishing it is 90% of it. But the last 10% is simply saying, I'm successful. I have succeeded. Pat yourself on the shoulder. See, we move through our successes so fast that we don't recognize that I'm enjoying myself, in fact, in and amongst the efforting that I'm engaged in.
And that's all part of the climate that we're in, and the mass, hypnosis.
Yeah.
We're all in slavery to our technology, aren't we? The digital world is ruling us. Well, we're almost out of time. Have you got any free events coming up that you can invite our listeners to?
We've been doing something called Park Bench, sit on the park bench. And how do you begin to give to yourself that 100%? And give to others. But one of the pieces that plays out in that project, and there's a couple of them coming up, is we're in the construct of creating a new architecture. What would a new world look like if you could, in fact, begin to create it?
Well, yeah, great question. Good question to leave us with. I'll just tell people to go over to masteringalchemy.com. They can check out all of the free stuff that you've got there, and it's a great starting place if you haven't explored it before. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thank you, Jim Self. I'll be back next week, and Jim, have a great new year.
Blessings. You also, Sandie.
Take care. Bye-bye.